Why are brand new Chinese EVs facing so many problems? Why are they bursting into flames all over the place? Why is it that their self-driving features are failing and sending people to their deaths and putting people in very awkward situations, smashing into things all the time? Why is it that the airbags are not deploying in these fancy, brand new Chinese EVs? The Chinese EV industry is like a Ponzi scheme, and it's probably going to fall down very soon.
天津有个地方啊，你看你们看这什么东西啊？这都是汽车，卖不出去呀，车，看看多少辆车，你们看一看，多少辆汽车啊？多少车？看看，看看多少车啊？
I'd like you to look at this field of brand new Geelys. I mean, it's not a field, it's just a huge amount of these things stored in front of one of the factories. It's impossible to count how many cars we're actually looking at here. But this is a common sight. All over China, there are these massive storage areas with thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of brand new cars sitting there just waiting, either rotting away or waiting, doing nothing. Well, there's a new thing that has been uncovered, well, something I've talked about in the past, and that is 0-mile used cars, or 0-kilometer second-hand cars, whichever way you want to say it. Now, I've talked about these plated cars sitting in fields before. I've shown you footage of BYDs and other new, brand new Chinese cars with license plates on them, but with the plastic still in the seats, and they've got weeds growing over them. Yeah, I've shown you this before. This is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on since the beginning of China's EV boom. And I'll explain to you why it's so important, and I'll also be able to ratify myself here a little bit because I've taken a lot of criticism for pointing these things out in the past. There are a lot of zealots out there, EV zealots, not just Chinese EV zealots and not just Chinese propagandists, but actual EV zealots who cannot face the reality that China is the land of shortcuts and facades, and China is playing a very dangerous game here. So let's talk about these 0-mile used cars, shall we? There just never seems to be enough time. We're busy with work, we're busy with the stresses of life. You know, the last thing we need to worry about is internet security.
Yeah, they hacked the crap out of me, stole my passwords, got into my internet banking, found out all my weird browser history.
But it is such a big threat, so why not get a bit of peace of mind and use a VPN? Better yet, use Surfshark VPN. There's so many good reasons to have a VPN. It creates a secure tunnel and prevents people from looking over your shoulder and seeing what you're doing online. But not only that, it helps you with things like discriminatory price gouging. If you set your server to a different country, you'll find out that you can actually get deals like flights and rent-a-cars cheaper than if you were to order them from your own country. It's weird that way. Surfshark VPN is awesome though. Check it out to get some peace of mind, give yourself that extra little bit of security, and take advantage of all the extra services like being able to watch videos that are blocked in your country online. Go to surfshark.com/SerpentZA and use the code SerpentZA at checkout to get 4 extra months off of Surfshark VPN. Hey babe, I just got us 4 months extra of Surfshark. Again, go to surfshark.com/SerpentZA and use the code SerpentZA at checkout to get those 4 extra months. And now, back to the show. The Chinese government gives subsidies and has historically given massive subsidies to EV manufacturers. But on top of that, EV manufacturers, of course, like all companies around the world, rely on investments. So now, if you're going to prove to your investors that your company is doing well and that you have a successful product, you're going to present them with sales data. You're going to go to your board meetings, you're going to approach everyone and say, hey guys, guess what? We sold way over target this month. We sold so many, they're just flying off the shelves. This is a great product. What a great investment you've made. On top of that, it's bragging rights. You get to see articles around the world in international news. Chinese EVs are now the leader in EV sales globally, or the leader in EV sales, full stop. They're flying off the shelves. So many are being sold. It's incredible. But what if I told you that not that many were being sold? What if I told you that the numbers had been messed with? What if I told you that the companies themselves were registering these cars, making them look as if they were sold because now they've got a plate on them, now they're insured, but they were just parking them in a parking lot and then trying to deal with it later? Well, that is what has been happening. It's been happening so much that the CEO of Great Wall, which the most creative name you can think of when it comes to a Chinese brand of car, has come out and has complained about this problem. In fact, he's brought the entire automotive industry's attention to this very problem. And he has compared it to China's Evergrande situation. You know, when the real estate market, which could never see a failure, started to fail. This is what we're seeing with Chinese EVs at the moment. So let me explain to you how it works. Very simple. Company A, and it doesn't matter which company it is because all Chinese EV companies are guilty of this. In fact, not just EV companies, just, you know, automotive companies in general. So let's just say Company A, that's their name. Company A goes and builds 200 cars. The government says, for every car sold, we will give you a subsidy of a certain amount of money. Okay, nobody's buying their cars. No problem. They just sell it to themselves. They register it, put it on a plate. Of course, no money changes hands, but they put a plate on it, and then they go put it in a field somewhere, or they put it in their parking lot, but now it's registered. Then they go to the government and say, look, all 200 of them sold. The government gives them the subsidy money. So they take that money for each one sold, and that covers the cost of the car itself, really, to manufacture most of the time, if they make it cheap. On top of that, they go to their investors and say, look, we sold our entire inventory. Things are going well. Invest more. Investors are like, this is a great deal. We're going to put more money into this company. And so they do. More money comes in and they rinse and repeat this process. Of course, they have some legitimate sales. There's a lot of hype. They put a lot of money into advertising, marketing. Of course, the investors do the same. So they make some legitimate sales, but they constantly have to make these fake sales so that the numbers exceed expectations, so they get more investment, more subsidies, you know what I mean? And also more prestige around the world in the press and within the local Chinese press. What you end up then is with fields upon fields of either rotting old rubbish cars that now can't be used because they've been sitting too long and have become, you know, broken as a result, or very serviceable, usable cars, but they don't belong to anyone. So what do? Very simple. You put them on the used market and say, look at this, a brand new 0 mileage, 0 kilometer car, and it's 30% less than the real, like if you bought a new one. So that's how you try to get rid of this inventory, sell it at a cut cost, you know, sell it at a loss. And that way you can now wash away all of your corrupt dealings, all your cooking of the books by still making a little bit of money off of this thing and selling it out onto the market. Here's where things start to make sense to me and to some other Chinese bloggers who've been talking about this.
0公里的二手车能不能买？你以为捡了个便宜，实际买回去个隐患，这背后藏着汽车行业的溃败、恶性循环的死局，这里边太多链路的人都是受害者。
You know, I talked about how airbags aren't working in a lot of these crashes. I've got lots of footage, lots of video clips of airbags failing to, you know, work when they really need to work.
雷总啊，我这车撞成这了，合成这了，结果的话，你看看，就撞成这了，安全气囊都没出来。你这一直说是安全，安全怎么安全？
I also have lots of footage of these cars bursting into flames.
后面没有冲力，怎么自燃起来？这旁边的车子能联系到吧？车子后面，哎呀，越烧越大。
lots of footage of these cars failing in many different ways, stopping in the middle of the highway. My theory is that when they build a car to not sell it, in other words, if you're going to build a car that you know you're just going to put a fake plate on, well, no, it's not fake, it's a real plate. They actually go through the registration process. But if you're just going to put a plate on it and put it in a yard somewhere, maybe you start to cut corners because you know that car is not a car you're going to sell at full price. So even from the get-go, when you start to manufacture it, you're like, well, maybe we'll be able to sell it on the second-hand market at a loss. So you know what? Don't put in good quality things here. Maybe we don't need to do very good quality control on this particular car. Maybe we don't need to put in new parts. Just put in some used parts, or maybe put in some fake rubbish parts or low quality metals or whatever the case, because that's not going to be a premium car that's sold new from one of our dealers. That's going to be something that we stick outside and put on the second-hand market and maybe sell, because there's like 100,000 out there, and we don't know if we're going to sell them all, and we're trying our best to dump these crap cars that we've got in inventory all over the country onto poor countries around the world, and we don't care about like African countries or whatever. So that's my theory. And I think it's a pretty sound theory because it would explain a lot. China is capable of making decent quality products. And I've always said this from the beginning, having lived in China for so long. There's nothing wrong with the capability and the skills of Chinese people. They can make the best products in the world if they want to. But the way Chinese society and Chinese business works is that it's always about taking shortcuts. It's always about maximizing profits over anything else. And as a result, actual Chinese brands always lack at the end of the day. You can get a brand like Apple, for instance, which the majority of their products are made in China, and they're top-notch quality. But that's because they have such stringent quality control from the international company, the American company Apple, that the shortcuts that normally would be taken cannot be taken. And if they are, Apple will have to take the brunt of it. They're going to have to eat the cost because, they cannot allow an unsafe product onto market. If iPhones started catching on fire and exploding all over the place, there'll be legal trouble for Apple. But if a Chinese unknown brand starts exporting cars and they start exploding and catching on fire on the streets of Nigeria, you know what? It's not going to be a problem for the Chinese company because the Nigerians won't be able to sue them and they won't be held to account. So there's always that. So at the end of the day, the whole Chinese EV Ponzi scheme looks like it might be coming down and it might be crashing. Because what are you going to do with all these cars? Unless they can manage to dump them on unsuspecting countries in Europe, maybe Australia seems to have no problem buying inferior low-quality cars, so maybe they'll end up in Australia. Maybe they'll end up in Africa, in South America. Maybe they'll dump them there. But remember, all of these cars were built on an unfair system. All of these cars and companies have relied on massive government subsidies. So it's not fair when it comes to normal competition because they've been subsidized. And although you can knock off a Porsche Taycan and make a car that looks very similar, almost exactly like it, you cannot knock off the safety features. You cannot knock off the many years of experience, the decades of experience, trial and error, R&D and all of that that's gone into making a Porsche Taycan. So of course you're going to make a car that crashes all the time, a car that has fit and finish issues, a car that is generally not safe and generally, well, just a good-looking but poor quality product. This industry is built on a house of cards. If you decide to invest in a Chinese EV, you are a fool. And I'll tell you why you're a fool. It's because if you buy a cheap one from an unknown brand or a very small brand, the chances are that brand's going to go away. Then you're not going to have any support. Then when the thing bricks itself or needs an update or has an issue, you're stuck. This has happened. Happened to many Chinese people. They're very unhappy about this. If you buy one of the bigger brands, well, you're helping to fuel this Ponzi scheme, which is incredibly detrimental to the environment. You have no idea. You've seen the cars. Do you know how much energy, how much pollution has been caused to create these seas of cars sitting around in parking lots? And it's all a money-making scheme. To create just one of these things uses up huge amounts of resources around the world. There's mining involved for all the lithium and the rare earths and the various other things that they need. There's slave labor involved in many cases. Of course, all the energy and the water and everything that's used to create everything that's in one of these EV cars is astounding. Buying a Chinese EV is one of the least environmentally conscious things you could possibly do. But at the same time, you're also guaranteed that you're not putting your family and yourself in any undue danger. So yeah, I did speak about this a couple of years ago. I knew I was right because I was getting it from Chinese sources. I was seeing it from the Chinese internet. I had Chinese friends reach out to me, Chinese car enthusiasts who I'd met living in China, reaching out to me about these issues. I mean, a lot of the dealers were putting videos online explaining this situation. You know, Chinese people are pragmatic. They're not going to hide this stuff. But wow, the amount of pushback. There is some sort of force really trying. I mean, obviously the Chinese government and the Chinese EV industry, yes. But there's something else. There's all these EV zealots around the world who, for some reason, have taken it upon themselves to stand on this mantle and attack anyone who wants to bring any sense to the situation, anybody who wants to point out the faults in the industry. And the Chinese EV industry has many, many, many faults, and its problems far outweigh any of the positives. It's a very bad thing for the earth. It's a very bad thing for financial markets. It's a very bad thing for automotive industries around the world. Anyway, I'm off my soapbox now. Thank you guys for watching. Please join me for my Friday show, the China show, where we talk about everything coming out of China. Crazy things, funny things, the latest news, the biggest propaganda out there. And if you really want to support me, check out my secret show on Monday. Anyway, until next time, guys, you know the drill. As always, don't go buying a 0-mile second-hand used car from a shady Chinese EV manufacturer. I mean, you're just helping to bring an end to the environment. Anyway, until next time, you know the drill. As always, stay awesome.
这就点钱啊！旁边的来，把这个音响来，把这个掏出来。旁边的也烧了，快点快点！这就点钱啊！旁边的，旁边的，来，把这个音响来，把这个掏出来。旁边的也烧了。
冷下。